Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. Hello, and welcome to the Autism in Black podcast. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I am the founder and CEO of Autism in Black, Inc., where we aim to include the excluded. Today, we have Joy Johnson on the show. Joy is a behavior specialist, inclusion specialist, and autism advocate who partners with organizations, individuals, and families to improve the lives of those impacted by autism. After spending years working in clinical settings, nonprofits, and schools, Joy knows how to truly serve and represent the ASD community members in various contexts. In addition to her extensive professional experiences, Joy is also diagnosed with autism herself. Joy holds a master's in education, a master's in psychology, and is currently a PhD candidate. I'm really excited about having Joy on the show, not only to talk about her experiences as a Black autistic female, but to talk about the importance of ABA from a cultural standpoint and why we as Black community members need to think about ABA as options for our children. Enjoy today's show. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. We have a very special guest today. We have Joy with us, Joy Johnson. She is amazing, and I'm so happy we connected, and I'm happy she's here on the podcast today. So I've already read your bio, Joy. Can you tell us a bit more about who you are and what you do?
Okay, first, thanks for having me. Second of all, I'm a behavior specialist, an inclusion specialist, and an autism advocate, but I also am autistic as well.
As a person who is autistic, you identify as autistic or a person with autism?
No, autistic is fine.
So as a autistic individual who now is a BCBA, tell us more about that. How did you get into the field of ABA?
I was out of the country for a while, and when I came back, I knew that I wanted to serve my population. I just didn't know how at that point. So I started working with a place here that serves individuals with autism, and they implemented ABA programs, and that was how I discovered ABA. And I immediately enrolled in a master's course specializing in ABA as soon as I got back. And then I just started discovering more and more. And I implemented some strategies for myself. And I was like, okay, I really like this. And that's how I got started.
I love that. And as some of us know, there is a bit of a struggle with accepting ABA in the actually autistic community. Have you yourself dealt with any backlash from the autistic community about your career?
I have. It's always, it was ongoing debates. I just kind of don't participate in anymore because it's just kind of like, having a conversation with something that's just not, an argument that's not going to be won because it's a lack of education on their behalf in terms of what ABA truly is and how it should be implemented ethically. If it's implemented ethically, then we're always okay. But some of them are under the impression that it's abusive because ABA is trying to teach us to be typical, which is not the goal of ABA. So it's just a lack of information within our community. And I also, that's another reason why I wanted to get involved, to disseminate more information so parents are aware that, it's not abuse when done ethically. And to be somebody on the spectrum that represents us, actually practicing ABA to kind of help regulate from within. So that was another reason why I wanted to get involved.
I have to say, when we got connected and you stated that you were a behavior specialist, I myself was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, especially knowing about how the autistic community feels about ABA. So for parents who are struggling with that struggle of seeing what is said in the actually autistic community, but then you yourself being actually autistic and a person who is involved with ABA therapy, what advice do you have for parents to look for when they're going to enroll their children in ABA therapy?
Just make sure that your therapist or the organization you're dealing with aligns with your values as a parent, and do a lot of research as to what truly is socially significant. A lot of times parents want to target behaviors that look odd, and that is conforming to like neurotypical standards. If the behavior simply looks odd but doesn't truly impact the individual's quality of life, then it's not something that should be necessarily targeted in therapy. We're really trying to focus on improving that person's quality of life. So when you're thinking about targeting goals for your kid, if they simply flap, which is a form of self-stimulatory behavior, stemming, but it doesn't disrupt anybody, it doesn't hurt them or themselves, this is not something that you want to exhaust your resources and time in terms of therapy on. You want to target goals such as functional communication, social goals, executive functioning, those types of things that truly impact how your quality of life is going to be. Because, truth be told, the biggest thing with the actually autistic community is neurotypicals targeting stemming. Stemming for us, a sensory input that we need. If you do have to target that because it is harmful or disruptive or, self-injurious, you still want to find a replacement behavior that provides us with a sensory input. It's all about replacement behaviors in ABA. So, it's just look for somebody who is truly interested in improving your child's quality of life and not just trying to make them look as though they're the norm of, what society, the mold that society has structured.
Yes, I love that. And I want to backtrack a little bit to talk about you and your journey being an autistic individual. What age were you diagnosed with autism?
I was diagnosed at 6, and I was always aware, but it was something that I was told not to really talk about or really disclose. I'm 43 years old, so back in my time, it was something that, might have put a negative stigma on, me. I really started having issues, though, related to it when I was around 12. And it was in my behaviors. I had a lot of maladaptive, so to speak, behaviors and a lot of problems socializing with my peers. So when I was 12 is when it really started impacting me as far as, my life.
You say that you were aware of it as at 6. Did your parents have that conversation with you that, you are autistic?
I don't think that conversation really occurred at 6 because I don't really think I, really grasped the concept. But around 12 is when we really started talking about it, and I started seeing more therapists and, getting treatment. So my mother had no choice but to really talk to me about it. My mother's a psychologist, but again, she's old school, so it was kind of like, we know, and I knew, but you don't need to tell your friends. You don't need to tell your friends' kids. I went to a very affluent school. I went to University of Chicago Laboratory School. So it's kind of like there was a lot of people that were Aspies there, but none of us really talked about it. But it's kind of like known now for having that type of kid there.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. And as a therapist myself, I know one of the things that I do think about is having that conversation with my 7-year-old daughter when the time is right and she can, grasp and understand. So what advice do you have for parents who are trying to have that conversation with their kids that, hey, you are autistic and
Right.
Everybody's different, but your differences include this.
Right. I mean, the thing that I really appreciate about nowadays, my mother, I think, my parents, period, they did the best that they could as far as, they thought they were protecting me from not really, telling me to talk about it. But now I think as young as your child can understand, you need to start having that conversation. And I think it's good that they talk about it with their peers, because the more people know, the easier it is to keep promoting acceptance and neurodiversity, because they're like, oh, that's no big deal. That's just Joy. She has autism. She explained why she flaps, Yeah. So the more you're armed with self-awareness, the easier it is for you to navigate through, disclosing it to your employees and stuff in the future, because it's like, hey, I have autism, but it's no big deal. It just, may have impacted me in this way, and I think having constant conversations with your children and kind of checking in with them, do you feel like anything, is impacting you right now, or would you like to discuss anything about it? Because we're very like, why do I do this? I always would look at myself like, why can't I do, what the rest of my friends are doing? And I think if my mother would have had more conversations with me, it's like, it's not that you can't do it. Maybe you're perceiving this differently. I would have had more, self-realization and been able to realize my potentials a lot earlier than I did.
I love that, especially around the conversation of, you thinking about why you can't do certain things. And I think as parents, we do try to shield our children, as as a mother, from certain things. And it's like, we think that we are protecting them, but sometimes it does cause hurt and pain, rather than just having the upfront conversation about, hey, this is what it is. And even though it looks like this, we can turn it around and reframe it to be this for you.
Right.
Right. So you said that at 12, you started having maladaptive behaviors. Can you explain that for the audience who may not know what maladaptive behaviors are?
So in my case, it was a lot of attention-seeking behavior. I did not know how to elicit attention from my peers. So I realized really quickly that what looked like deviance probably to society, rebellious behavior, was how I would receive attention from my peers, because I really didn't know how to fit in socially with them. But doing that, it's like, oh, she's like a badass, and so I kind of got negative attention, but I was just seeking attention. I also was very self-injurious. I do have sensory processing disorder, in addition to autism, but I also, I think a lot of my frustrations would kind of just build up. I would do a lot of head banging, just a lot of self-injurious, inflicting harm upon myself. And, I just didn't know why, why was I doing this? My peers weren't doing this. So, that just led. And then actually later on, because I think it's really important that parents think about this too. When I was around, I want to say 17, I became sexually active earlier in life. And I think that was also a way that I was masking, because it allowed me to feel accepted, by my peers and be popular, So
I actually never thought of that. And having a girl myself, it makes sense, that sex is a way to get the attention seeking for yourself, even though your partner may not be feeling the same thing as you. You're feeling wanted in that moment and feeling
right.
like, okay, this is what I need in that moment. Right.
And it was the only way that I felt like I could truly engage. And I really felt like I had a connection to my peers. And I didn't even really, I know I didn't enjoy sex because of my sensory processing disorder. But it was something that I felt like I could gain acceptance, particularly, of course, from boys, even from girls, though, because it's something I could talk about to make it seem like I was this girl that was doing all of this stuff, but it really wasn't something that I enjoyed, So I think, again, if I had more, awareness of what was going on with myself, I would have known, this is not the way to get attention. Yeah. There are other ways that I can get attention. And those are the types of conversations that you have to have with your children as well. If you realize that they're trying to fit in, it's like, okay, let's find people that enjoy doing the same special interests as you. And I could have engaged with those people and found special groups or something instead of doing the things that I was doing.
But, that brings up a good point of having that conversation about sex with your child. I think for a lot of parents that I have engaged with, they have said that they don't know how to have the conversation with their child. And a lot of them don't even want to think about their child having sex because they are autistic, as if they just are not going to have sex. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense.
And I mean, that's something that I also think that we need to talk to our children about too, as they're becoming adults. When they get around 17, 18, going to college, it's a reality of something that may happen. And with me, I engaged, I said I started early, and I continue to engage in sex during adulthood and did not enjoy it because I was not really aware of my sensory processing issues. So I have some things that are really aversive to me. So in order to have a healthy sex life, moving forward into marriage, you need to be comfortable enough with yourself and have already engaged in these conversations, you find, certain types of sensory aversive. So you need to have that conversation with your partner going into, serious relationships and in marriage. And you need to be comfortable doing that, so you need to discuss those things. It's something that you have to talk about. A healthy relationship when it comes to, everything, including sex, is give and take. And it's only fair that you have to discuss certain sensory needs that you may have that may be different from your neurotypical peers that are engaging in sex.
That really is helpful to me, and I'm writing this down, y'all. Because as a mother who tries to have a shame-free sex environment for my children and have open conversations with them, I never thought about having the sensory conversation with Malia.
Yep. Because it can be traumatic. For me,
exactly.
It was actually very traumatic, and I did not enjoy it until I got married. And then we sat down and we had conversations, and he's like, oh, okay. So it took some experimentation without getting explicit, but we had to discover different things that meet my sensory needs while accommodating his as well. And 20 years later, it's fine. What may be considered weird or whatever is not weird when it's an intimacy between you and your partner. And if you're going to be mature enough to engage in sex, which is what I tell my children, you have to be mature enough to have these conversations.
Yes, I love that. And I'm glad you're being so open, on this show, because as parents and as a neurotypical parent, that's not something that I had even fathomed that I would have to talk to her about, the sensory aspect of sex, because that for me, that's not something that, I deal with. So thank you for that.
Well, during adolescence and puberty, you have to think about that, because your child may begin to masturbate. That's like a real, a lot of my clients, and I'm talking about girls too, they start to do that. And what it is another sensory seeking thing. Mm-hmm. So they discover this feeling that they can touch themselves, and they become hyper sexual kind of, Yeah. So when you have a kid, especially a kid that's not vocal or verbal and may have problems, communicating, when they hit puberty, you want to discuss with them, when is it appropriate to masturbate, where, to make sure they're not doing it inappropriately, and proper materials, because I've seen kids try to put things places that can't go places, so you have to have, I've even made social stories for children about, in your room. And I always tell my kids, because I have some kids that engage in those behaviors or have in public. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, there's private hands and there's public hands. So that's my thing. I always tell, private hands are in your room behind closed doors. Public hands, you don't do that in public. Yes. Without denying them that, because that's a natural thing for adolescents. It just may look different for your child with autism, and you have to understand it. But just telling them they can't do it at all, I wouldn't recommend that.
Yes.
Regulating it.
Exactly. As a therapist, I wouldn't recommend that either. That is just not going to help. And I think parents think by saying no, or we're not going to discuss it, that it's not going to happen. But it's not happening for them as parents when their children are out here getting misinformation and then engaging in things that they don't even want to do because they weren't given the proper information at home.
Right.
And then what about consent? Explaining consent to your child for themselves and for others.
Yep. It's kind of like, how people are always talking about the personal space, and it's kind of forming it in the same type of context, depending on how they can, comprehend it. But it's like, you have to, ask permission. You can't just touch people without their permission, because your body is your body, their body is their body, Yeah. And, you have to really be careful with explaining to them, consent and all these other things. But also for the people that may have children that they may retain guardianship of over adulthood, you also have to think about giving your child the opportunity to engage in relationships as well, because they are adults. And a lot of times people, think, oh, they're autistic, they can just sit in the house. No, they need to find some social groups, find some, there's a way to regulate everything and allow them to have the most fruitful lives they can, within their limits. But even if your child is like non-vocal, non-verbal, that doesn't mean they don't want to have a companion or be in a relationship. So
I love that. It's actually a form of ableism that parents don't realize that they're doing, because they think that their child doesn't want it, but they haven't even asked their child if that's something that they want.
Yeah. I mean, it's gone very deep for me. I've also heard people like, oh, he said he's gay, but he don't know if he's gay. You know, it's just like, you can't deny a person's sexual orientation or, you know, whatever they choose. You got to allow them to have that same freedom to experiment as you would any other child, you know?
Yeah.
But not saying let them go run wild, you know, explain to them and try to do it in a way that, you know, is safe, of course. But, you know, you have to listen to your child. Just because we have autism doesn't mean we don't know what we like and dislike, you know?
Yes, I agree. And being a Black autistic woman, have you had to deal with any struggles being a Black autistic woman?
Yeah, I feel like that right now, that narrative is all white women. And the weird thing is, statistically, it's mostly males that are diagnosed with autism, but that narrative, that's like controlled by white women. And it's like white angry women, to be honest.
I'm here for the honesty. I love it.
I mean, that's just my perspective, you know? And I know it's a sensitive subject, but it's also white people who have the privilege of engaging in maladaptive behaviors like I described publicly. And I feel like, you know, in America, because I live in America, Black people don't have that privilege. So you can't have your 15-year-old son hitting people or hitting himself in public, you know, because the police can see that, you know, as, oh, he's doing some type of weird antisocial behavior. And the next thing you know, he's arrested.
Yeah.
So part of my problem with these white women that are, you know, disseminating information about not getting therapy is I'm praying that my Black parents think closely about how that impacts us socially. We need therapy. And a lot of these white women are not impacted to the point of like my clients, you know, I wouldn't say that I'm impacted severely, but I do have clients that are, and it's not fair to try to control the narrative from somebody who only needs a little bit of support when it's those of us out there that need a lot. And I think that it actually kind of makes me sad, because I kind of feel like it makes it seem that's perpetuating the stereotype that we only care about ourselves.
Yes.
And so the people, you know, with autism level 1 or, you know, Asperger's, are only thinking about, oh, let me, you know, be wild and free. But what about the people who need therapy? For you, therapy might be an option, but that's not always the case. And especially in the Black community, and especially for a Black male. Like, you cannot have a Black male out in public just doing whatever he pleases. And it's not about conforming to typical norms. It's about living a healthy and productive life and being a productive citizen. You know, like, you can't just walk around doing whatever you want. You have to learn how to conform. I don't care who you are. You know, we just have rules as a society, period. You know,
especially for those of us in the Black community. And I hope my Black parents are really taking in what Joy is saying, you know, how we operate as Black individuals in society. It's always been different. And, you know, listening to the actual autistic community, you have to still take that into consideration for your child being in society and how people are going to view them, especially the police, because these are times in the society that's very dangerous for us as Black people.
And that kind of brings me to like diagnosis too, because I meet a lot of Black parents that sometimes feel like it'll be a hindrance to be Black and have a, you know, disability, but that opens up resources, and then it lets you know that, you know, you can get assessments and find out what you need to treat.
Yeah.
If you just ignore it, it's not going to go away. If you just ignore it, it could be a deficit that is confused as a deviance, and they can end up in legal trouble. If they do get in some type of trouble, like at school and stuff, you kind of have, you know, the autism diagnosis as a consideration that, you know, authorities have to take, you know, into account. Like, okay, this person has autism. They may not have perceived this, you know, but without all of that, you just, you know, unfortunately, just another Black man that's out there wilding out, you know, or a Black woman.
given diagnosis such as oppositional defiant or emotionally disturbed, and those kind of behavior diagnosis that then set them up for the school to prison pipeline.
Yep. And I see that a lot. I'm in Baltimore, and I see that a lot out here. And it's unfortunate, you know, and it's very sad. But with the resources, that'll help your child, you know, realize their full potential. All you got to do is, you know, get some therapy, stay consistent, and make sure your child knows how to advocate for themselves. You know how to advocate, and you can work through it, but don't view it as a hindrance. And it can be a blessing in many ways. There's a lot of strengths that come along with having autism as well that people just don't understand. We can be some of the best employees that you've ever had. We have focus and concentration, on things that people consider menial sometimes, So think about that.
Thank you for that. With you being actually autistic and then being in the ABA field, do you think that has helped you with your career in working with individuals who are also autistic?
It depends on the parent. I have had parents that are like, oh my gosh, you have autism. How can you help my autistic child? And then I have some parents that are like, that's great because you can see it from the perspective, as they see it. And they appreciate it a whole lot more because they're like, okay, you relate to my child, which I do, and it's truly a passion and almost an obligation that I feel like I have. I have a voice. I was, blessed enough to be able to pursue the education that I want, and I want to help my people, in every way that I can, so.
I love that. And how did you deal with those who do give you kind of the negative backlash when trying to, do your job?
Well, so far in my experiences, I wasn't ever fired immediately. It's kind of like, oh, we'll see. And they quickly realized that, okay, just because she has autism, that doesn't impact her ability to give therapy. But then I also feel like that lets them see maybe you're not realizing your child's full potential because you thought that because I had autism, I couldn't do this. So maybe you have some preconceived biases that you don't even realize with your own child, like putting these limitations on them. And it's like, don't ever limit us. It just takes some time sometimes. Delayed doesn't mean that it will never happen. It's just slower,
Yes. I love that because even for those of us who are neurotypical, things don't happen just right then. So why can't we give the same grace to individuals who do have disabilities? It boggles my mind that as a society, we give all the grace to people who don't have disabilities, but then those who have disabilities, especially ones that are not seen, we don't give the grace to.
Right. And I say never give up. I love working with adults. I dropped out of high school. I was having a lot of problems, just really confused, so I didn't graduate. I didn't get a GED until I was 26. And it took a lot, for me to do it. But then after that, I got 2 graduate degrees. I'm in a PhD program now. It was a slow,
still amazing.
a slow progression, but I was able to do it just because I had the support system, my husband was always like, you can do this, So you just have to, be consistent and keep, trying at it.
And that brings up a good point for me about your support system. How important is it to have a support system?
I think it's detrimental. And for me, I just really, really am fortunate to have a husband. He's neurotypical, but he's very understanding and patient, which is another thing that I want to bring up to parents. Opportunity to, engage in relationships.
Yes.
Having a neurotypical peer that I live with is like the best resource ever for me. And I've been married since I was, 20. And I feel like I developed so much being married, more than I did, in my teenage years, because he was able to model behavior and help me. So family members and society, period. A lot of times when we turn 21, a lot of the support just drops.
Yes.
And so, especially in the Black community, I would love if I saw more of us like rally around, like we have Black agencies, that kind of uplift us. I see some other, communities doing it, and I'm like, this is what I want for us. Like, I want us to have that type of resource to where, from 0 to 80, we, have support. Because it's really like after 21, if you don't have a if you don't have like autism level 2 or 3, like if you're not severely impacted, you really don't have a whole lot of resources. And you still need support. So just remember that, parents, when
Yeah.
they're 21, that doesn't mean it's over. That could mean it's just beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's a good, real point though. Cause I mean, especially in the Black community, kind of when you turn 18, you like,
mm-hmm.
you're on your own, you got to go figure out life, where a lot of other, cultures rally around until they get married and go on and then start their own family. And I think it's so important, especially, for children who have disabilities, especially ones that may not seem as extreme as others. You still
mm-hmm.
have to rally around them and help them navigate through this, because turning 21 and navigating adulthood, that's a tricky situation. Even for me as a
right.
that was a very hard thing. I was like, oh, this is real pain.
Right.
Real. This is real out here. They will cut my lights off. So we have to make sure that portion of life is taken care of, as well as navigating and helping them through, because it is very real when you turn 21 and you're like, okay, you're an adult and you're Black and you are a Black woman or a Black male in society as an adult. It's different for us, and you have to make sure that you are preparing and navigating your child through that phase in life.
Right. I feel like the expectation for me was, she's probably not going to accomplish much. Mm-hmm. That's it. And I didn't really start getting into myself until I said like 26, Mm-hmm. But I feel like it was like, oh, she'll just probably, just end up poor, because what else am I going to do without a high school diploma? And I had a child by the time I was 17, so it was like, life is over. She's disabled. She got a kid. It's over,
Yeah. How did you navigate parenthood at that young age? And then, being actually autistic?
Well, that's why I say you really need to talk to your kids about sex. It was really, really, really difficult. Like I just didn't know what was going on. And my 25-year-old, which is my oldest child, is autistic as well. And I didn't recognize it because I was autistic. So it looked normal to me.
Yes. Yes.
So it was like a lot. Once, I got married, and my husband's family is like the Black Chicago, real close family. Mm-hmm. And they really started helping me with stuff. And I will say that's what I love about the Black community. They might not always acknowledge your disability, but it's kind of like, we don't care what's wrong with you. You're going to learn how to do this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to learn once I married into his family. And he never really cared, but he was really, really, people always called him the baby mama. Mm-hmm. Because I don't have the innate maternal instincts. They just don't come like naturally, and I had to kind of train myself. And that's another topic that I am very concerned about in the Black community, especially because a lot of us will lose custody of our kids if we don't have support, just because we have a diagnosis, like quicker than a drug addict. Because they feel like you have an intellectual disability or a disability, you can't raise your child. So
when I tell you are teaching me today, look, as a mom having a autistic daughter, I'm eating all this up.
Yeah. It happens way more than people think. They find out you have a diagnosis, they put you in a neurotypical learning environment. The parents in class expect you to learn from 6 weeks. You don't learn, your child is going to get taken away. And it happens quicker. Like they give a drug addict more opportunity and chance than they do somebody with a disability. And it happens a lot. Think about how many people in lower socioeconomic situations that are living in like public housing. Yeah. And some guy gets them pregnant so they can get a part of their disability check.
Yes.
I saw it a lot living in New York. One by one, I watched one person's children just, get taken away, child after child, because a lot of times we have kids with disabilities too. Mm-hmm. And so, it's a sad thing. So again, support, getting treatment and diagnosis. And because a lot of these people, I'm not sure if they even have formal, diagnosis. Yes. But they were able to assess that they had some type of cognitive disability. Mm-hmm. So
I love that. So what is next for you?
I am working on my PhD, and I want to get involved in research that impacts clinical decisions. Yeah. So I want to involve us, meaning the autistic population, in more clinical decisions as far as what I talked about earlier, targeting things that are not socially significant. So I plan on designing some survey model type research methods that will survey us so we can have our input within clinical decisions, because socially significant means what society deems appropriate, and we're a part of society, but currently we're not reflected in data. And so I want us to be reflected in data so people can see like, okay, this really doesn't impact their quality of life. Matter of fact, it might benefit, or vice versa. So we're more involved in treatment decisions, and we'll have more buy-in for receiving ABA and therapy. People are not so like, oh, don't do therapy. They try to make us neurotypical. If we're more involved and we have more of a voice in treatment decisions, I think that that'll help us in the long run as far as receiving treatment.
I love that. Do you have any resources that you recommend for parents, caregivers, or healthcare professionals that could be listening today?
Oh my gosh, other autistic people.
I love that.
Yeah, I really think, a lot of these agencies and organizations, I'm not saying they're not good, because some of them have been really good, but it's just like a really case by case, depending on your region, depending on how much exposure they've had to other, people with autism. So, try to develop relationships with other people and other adults who have been impacted but have overcome some of these challenges, and solicit them for like advice on what they can seek in your area, because I'm only in one particular area of the world. So there's always like small organizations of us, put together that maybe you can reach out to and learn from them.
And parents, I really can't stress enough how important that is. Especially if you're a neurotypical parent, because there's things that we don't think about. Just as Joy has enlightened me to so much that I actually do need to teach Malia, it's so good to have somebody who understands what your child is going through or will be going through. So, make sure you take up that opportunity if you have the chance to find somebody who is actually autistic, that you can go and have them, mentor your child or talk to your child about things that you wouldn't even think that you needed to talk to your child about.
I agree.
Now, where can those listening find you?
I'm on Instagram as Joy F. Johnson. I have a website, joyfjohnson.com. And you can reach out to me on either one of those venues, and I can be in contact with you. I can do a lot of, virtual work too. Like, so if you want to reach out to another autistic person, I'm always can be that person, just find me on either of those places.
And we will have all of Joy's information and the resources that she talked about in the show notes. I cannot thank you enough for being on this episode, and I do want you back on another episode, and I hope that you will bless us and grace us with, your wisdom and inspiring us as parents to do something different with our children. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you all for listening, and we'll catch you on another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. If you haven't done so, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autisminblack.org/podcast. And be sure to share your takeaways from the show on IG stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBpod so that we can find them and share them. And if you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, make sure to join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community. And please make sure to answer the questions to gain entry. Thank you for listening and joining me this week. Have a good one.